Culinary Saijiki podcast. My name is Allison Whipple, and twice a month I'll bring you a conversation with a fellow haiku practitioner about the way that food and the seasons show up in their haiku practice. Visit www.culinarysaijiki.com to listen to the podcast, read long-form essays on these topics, and sign up to join the podcast conversation. You can also support the project at buymeacoffee.com/culinarysaijiki. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 7. I am in my new house in St. Louis, and I'm recording with my microphone again. I'm so happy to have it back. It turns out it was in the house where I was staying all along. It was just way back in a corner behind a bunch of boxes, and I couldn't find it, but I have found it. I found my big recording headphones, and I have a Topo Chico that I'm enjoying while I work on this show, in a glass bottle, no less. So Topo Chico, if you're not from Texas, you might not know the greatness. It is the best carbonated mineral water in the world, in my opinion. And it's not super easy to find in St. Louis, and it's especially not super easy to find in a glass bottle. And it's not easy to find the plain unflavored one. So to find plain in a glass bottle, I'm so very happy. I'm also recording this a lot more down to the wire than I prefer. It's Monday, and I usually record on the weekends all the time. Do my recording and editing on weekends. But, 2 weekends ago, we were moving all of our stuff into the house. This past weekend, we've spent just unpacking everything. So here I am, Monday, just trying to get it out and meet my own creative deadlines. I'm the only one holding myself accountable, I suppose, but it's important to me to stick to my schedule. Anyway, over on the blog, I have a post on first thoughts on food in classical haiku. And I know a saijiki usually focuses on contemporary haiku that are being sort of published in the time the saijiki is put together. But, this is not a standard saijiki, and I was interested in the way food does show up in English translations of classical haiku. And so I think I'm going to revisit that topic. I had a lot of fun with it, but that is, my first thoughts are up there. All right. I still do have slots open for guests for October, so if you want to be on the podcast, head over to culinarysaijiki.com, click the Join the Conversation link, fill out the Google form. We will get you signed up. I would love to talk to you. I actually had a great haiku date with my friend Brian this afternoon, and I meant to ask him, bug him, you're my friend, you have to be on my show now. But I forgot because we were having just such a nice discussion about other things. But, Brian, if you're listening, hey, come on the podcast. Anyway, otherwise you can support the project through buymeacoffee.com/culinarysaijiki. And, if that's not in your budget, A-okay. One of the best ways you can support the show is just to share it. And I really love when people share that stuff out. It means a lot. All right. Today, my conversation is with Jennifer Hambrick. I actually recorded this from Franklin, Illinois, where we'd gone to stay at John's family farm for the weekend. Sometimes it's nice to just go get out of the city, and now that we're not a 15-hour drive, that's pretty feasible. And it's a beautiful farm just surrounded by fields. It's a really lovely place to think and write and talk about haiku. Unfortunately, that day there was a storm, so I had to do a lot of editing because a storm just knocked out part of our early conversation. And I'd never had a problem with recording anything before. And this was the first time that I'm talking to, a professional broadcaster. A storm 10 miles away knocks out an internet tower or whatever, and we lose signal for a few minutes. So editing that, and I grew up in Ohio. I have a great fondness for Ohio still. So I also we had a lot of like little Ohio digressions that were super fun, but not necessarily germane to the podcast. So a good challenge for my editing and listening skills, and all in all, a fun conversation. And so if you've been thinking about being on the podcast, just know like we have a great time talking. And if you've been unsure, consider this your sign. Anyway, a big thanks to Jennifer for talking with me, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Four-time Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominee Jennifer Hambrick is the author of the poetry collections In the High Weeds, winner of the Stevens Manuscript Award of the National Federation of State Poetry Societies, Joyride from Red Moon Press, winner of the Marian Bluger Book Award from Haiku Canada, and Unscathed from Night Ballet Press. She was featured by former U.S. Poet Laureate Ted Kooser in American Life in Poetry and has received numerous awards and prizes, including first prize in the Martin Lucas Haiku Award Competition, United Kingdom, first prize in the Haiku Society of America's Haibun Award Competition, the Sheila Nagig Press Poetry Prize, and many others. Her poetry appears in the Columbia Review, the American Journal of Poetry, Santa Clara Review, Maryland Literary Review, Poem, in all caps, Main Street Rag, Modern Haiku, Frog Pond, Contemporary Haibun Online, and many other journals and invited anthologies. Jennifer lives in a place dear to my heart, Columbus, Ohio.
Hi, Allison. Thank you. I didn't know that Columbus was dear to your heart. Is it?
So I grew up in Cleveland, and I went to Kenyon College. My very first serious boyfriend went to Ohio State. My sister went to Ohio State. My cousin went there. So even though I didn't go there, like Ohio State, especially if you went to Kenyon, Kenyon was a great place, but Ohio State was just a place to be.
Sure. Okay. That's cool. I didn't know you had. Okay, great. Well,
yeah, no, I've got Ohio roots.
Excellent.
So do you want to dive in and read your first two haiku?
I'd be happy to. Friday night wine, just a skosh more than a full moon. Friday night wine, just a skosh more than a full moon. Manhattan evening, 3 fingers of sunset. Manhattan evening, 3 fingers of sunset.
And whenever I'm grouping these together, I always group them by associations that I have that may not have any association to the reader. But my first husband is Jewish. I always want to say was because we're not married, but he's still alive and still Jewish. And so in college, I spent a lot of time in the Hillel scene, and including going to the Friday night dinner. And when I was first married, we would do a little Shabbat thing on Friday night. So like the whole Friday night wine thing like evoked some very like sweet and tender memories for me. And but again, this I think I also love this because it points to that expansiveness of haiku of like this evokes some very specific things for me. But also there's the whole like it's Friday night, happy hour, kick back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it's interesting to hear your own personal take on that, and that's your take on my poem. I think actually really elevates the poem because I think when this poem kind of came to my mind, it was a Friday evening. I was out, at the end of a work week, letting the dog out in the backyard, and it was winter or early spring. Anyway, it was still kind of dark. It was dark at that point in time, and I just remember looking up and seeing, like this big moon up there and thinking of Friday night wine and just a skosh more. And then I thought just a skosh, originally I thought, just a skosh more than a half moon. And then I thought, no, we want more than a full moon, right? On Friday night. So yeah, it was more of a sort of party poem. This poem kind of popped into my head I think it was actually on a Friday night at the end of a long work week, and I was at home in the winter or maybe early spring. Anyway, it was dark out, letting the dog out in our backyard, and I was out there with him. And I looked up and I saw the moon, and there was this. It was this kind of big moon. And I thought, Friday night wine. And originally I thought, just a skosh more than a half moon. But then I thought, no, we want more than a half moon. We want more than a full moon. So anyway, yeah, it was sort of a party coup in that sense.
And I think, there's um my whole data. I haven't, I've been collecting food and beverage haiku as part of this project, and it hasn't made it into my collection, all of the alcohol and moon haiku yet. But I know that both in the contemporary and classical traditions, I see a lot of that. Like there seems to be some sort of connection, especially to a full moon. And just having a cold one or a stiff one at the end of the week.
That's interesting. I didn't know that there was a sort of booze full moon connection. I didn't know that.
It's not one that it's not something I have definitively charted out. It's something, as I go deeper into this project, I sort of pick up on like threads or consistent themes, and I don't really necessarily write about them or try to talk about them too much until I feel like I've collected enough that there's something worthwhile, meaningful to say about it, or I can say, yes, this does seem to be like a real, like, consistent thing that people do. But one thing I have noticed in my own reading is I see tequila moon haiku, I've seen whiskey moon haiku,
Oh, sure.
uh,
Yes. Okay.
I've seen some sake moon
Yeah.
haiku. So it definitely seems to be a thing, especially in relation to a full moon.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that makes sense, the different types of moons, full moon, half moon, quarter moon, they're sort of passé, but whiskey moon, tequila moon,
Yeah.
yeah.
But the phases of the moon do come up too.
Mhm,
Usually a full
mhm.
moon, sometimes a quarter moon, sometimes a half moon. But no one's drinking at the new moon. It seems, or very
Isn't
rarely.
that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Maybe I should write a new moon booze haiku.
Maybe it
Someone
could be a
should,
whole
yeah.
series. Someone
Maybe you
should.
should.
That that's everybody's homework.
Yeah, yeah.
And Manhattan Evening. That one also um, evokes some very personal memories. So my aunt has lived in Manhattan for pretty much as long as I've been alive. So a while, and she and her husband live in Washington Heights, and in the evenings, they can go just stand out on their back patio and look across the river and have a drink.
Mm,
And I've definitely done that when I've gone to visit them, and so it's Manhattan, but then there's the play on the Manhattan cocktail.
mhm, yeah.
And I know there's some people shy away from that sort of wordplay in their haiku, but I love it. I'm always intrigued by um, wordplay like that feels subtle and
Uh-huh.
natural. And I think one of the reasons people often shy away from it is because sometimes you run the risk of getting a haiku that sounds like a dad joke.
Yeah.
But this one didn't feel like this one felt like, oh, at least I perceived wordplay here. And again, bringing my own. This is what happens when anyone brings their own experience to the poem. Um,
Right.
but it felt very natural. This was not, this didn't seem like silly or like a pun. It really worked on both levels for me.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And this question of wordplay in haiku, I think is it's an interesting one and also an important one because actually there's a lot of this kind of wordplay in haiku. There
Absolutely.
there is some that is more punish than others, as you kind of pointed out. I'm generally not a fan of that. This, however, what I've done in this poem is more akin to, like the literary just device of zeugma, where sort
Mm,
of an attribute of one thing is attributed to an attribute of to another thing, and so instead
mhm.
of three fingers of whiskey or three fingers of bourbon or whatever's in a Manhattan, it's three fingers of sunset, and so but you see a lot of that. You see a lot of that in haiku, actually. I think, and I think some of my favorite haiku by other authors. Um, do this kind of thing very, very, very cleverly, and it just kind of makes a
Mhm.
poem pop.
Yeah. And I sort of wonder if I always wonder if people who are very suspicious of that kind of wordplay, if they've just read too many, well, I'll just call them like amateur ones, where it did like it hit really heavy or it hit really flat. And because that really is when we like really dig back even into the like pre haiku tradition. There are other types of sort of um, in ancient Japan, like poetry composition contests on the fly, and being able to do a wordplay like that, um, that was one of the techniques that was highly
Hmm.
prized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, when there is some sophistication to it, when it's still a poem and not a dad joke, as you put it,
Yeah.
then I think it's worked. And I don't think there's anything wrong. Well, the whole genre of senju, really is, and this is really more of a senju, I would say, than a haiku. Um, there's no real season word per se, but
Mhm.
it's also more senju flavored. You know what I mean? And senju, having to do more with kind of human foibles, um, which can be kind of droll and witty and silly, and kind of laughing at ourselves. But senju, of course, can be more serious flavored too. But this one I think is really
Mhm.
more one of the kind of droll, funny, kind of pointing the finger at ourselves for how silly we are. you know that that kind of thing. So
And the Manhattan Evening haiku, for me, it also comes back to something that I feel like I bring up in every single episode, and it's a pressing question, I think, for me in my own exploration, and it's something that comes up a lot. Is we get a lot of concern about like, can you expect the reader to go look up a word, or like, can you go expect them to like look up a reference?
hmm
And so for me, like, yes, and if they're not going to, that's on them. Um, and also, like, someone who has been a teetotaler their whole life might not even know that there's a reference to look up.
right.
And that's okay. It can still work. But to me, it points to that like that really fascinating aspect of haiku, of especially in such a short poem, how much rests on just being able to hope that your reader has enough of the shared cultural context you
Hmm.
do, and there's no guarantee of that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a good point, and I think that's actually probably true of just about every piece of writing in every genre.
Yeah.
But in a haiku or a senju, one of these extremely short poems, there just isn't, time or space, as you pointed out, to kind of go into any explanation, or even to make any other kinds of references, oblique references, that might sort of help fill in any of the gaps in the reader's minds. But I also just want to point out that I personally am not a Manhattan drinker. You know what I mean? I don't drink hard liquor. I like my occasional glass of Friday night wine. But so this poem for me was sort of, I had to kind of look up, okay, now how many fingers of is it whiskey even, or bourbon? I don't even remember now. Are in a Manhattan. Oh, okay, so two, and I saw these recipes online for Manhattans that were saying, pour like 2 fingers in. And so I thought, well,
Mhm.
no, as with the Scotch more than a full moon, we're not gonna pour 2 fingers of sunset in here. We're gonna pour 3 fingers of sunset and give the reader this expansive kind of picture of maybe the Manhattan skyline, with a nice, beautiful sunset, and this poem was first published in an online journal, very good journal called Tiny Words, that has a really lively community of contributors, and also people will respond online in the
Yeah.
comments, to people's poems. And one of the comments for this poem was, "Oh, I can totally see the little maraschino cherry as the sun,
Yes.
as part of this sunset," which I thought was really interesting, because of course there's
Mhm.
no reference to the maraschino cherry except by way of the Manhattan. So anyway, but yeah, um,
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating to me how it's just three little lines and it can evoke so many different perceptions.
And that's, that's what haiku and senju do. I think when they're working pretty well. I would just want to add that these two alcohol related poems, nobody's advocating drinking more than we should. So drink
No,
responsibly, write alcohol related haiku responsibly.
certainly. I don't even, I don't even, I couldn't even, I had to give up. I used to love Manhattans and it just stopped agreeing with me.
Ah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so it's part of it. I'm like, oh, I love it. It's sentimental. I wish I could have one, but
Uh,
it's not worth it.
yeah, right. Sure, sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so next we're sort of moving on to breakfast related poems. Do you want to go on to those?
Sure. Breakfast. The stiletto heel in the drive-through lane. Breakfast. The stiletto heel in the drive-through lane. Egg yolk sunrise. The slow sizzle of tortillas. Egg yolk sunrise. The slow sizzle of tortillas.
So I liked going. It was actually so. You also had another morning meal haiku about coffee, and I always try to keep it to 8, and it was so hard to cut that one. But I did like breakfast following the wine and the Manhattan haiku because I'm like that just sounds like something that would happen after too many
Oh,
Manhattans.
well, good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So does that one have a specific story, or is that a sort of thing where like the image just comes to you?
Um, the this it sort of has a semi-specific story. At the time I wrote this haiku. There was a McDonald's. Actually, I'm going to start that again. At the time I wrote this haiku, there was a fast food restaurant right on my drive to work. And I'm not a huge fan of fast food, you know. But on a late morning, and you just need some protein to kind of get you to lunch. It can do in a pinch. So I remember um, just sort of sitting there in the drive-through lane at this fast food restaurant, and thinking about the breakfast I was about to order and then eat, you know. And then I saw, something like really incongruous, like a pair of shorts or a sneaker or something like that. And so I just made it a stiletto heel because that's really, really incongruous and really random.
It really is.
So, so yeah, so that's the sort of semi, so in poetry it's about telling emotional truth, right? And so you don't let the facts get in the way of the truth. So I kind of fudge the facts a little bit with the story.
I mean, it's such a great image. It's definitely much more interest, and certainly if you see a pair of shorts in the drive-through, you do wonder. But like that stiletto heel is so much
Yeah.
so much more like
How did that get there? Yeah.
what happened? How did I
Maybe
get
that
there?
got there after the last Manhattan and before the, you
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
An egg yolk sunrise is part of a haibun that you wrote.
Right. So Egg Yolk Sunrise is the opening haibun of my haibun Food Truck Love from my haibun collection Joyride. It's actually also the title of the whole first section of that collection as well. And what inspired the haibun was I should say Columbus has really an incredible food culture. I mean, there are some really, really phenomenal restaurants in Columbus, and there are some really, some people who are really, really, really interested in food, and my husband and I are as well. And there used to be a place in Columbus that was sort of like it was sort of like a whole sort of gathering point for a whole bunch of food trucks. where you could like go to the food truck of your choice and get the type of food that you wanted to get from that food truck. And those trucks were right outside this old warehouse building, or this old factory building that was turned into kind of like, like a mess hall in a way. So you could get your food at the food truck and then bring it in and eat it. And so the story of the High Boon actually has to do with two food truck owners who, and I think I'm just gonna leave it there. So you have to read the book. You have to read the High Boon. But one of the food truck owners owns a taco truck, and so the tortillas, the reference to the tortillas, and just to, the first line of this haiku, egg yolk sunrise. Okay, I mean, how cliched is it to liken, a rising sun to an egg yolk? I know that, and that was in part the point, to sort of to put out there in the front of this really actually kind of spicy and lively haibun, that has a lot of like wordplay in the prose, which isn't really prose; it's really more like a free verse poem. I really wanted to set the tone of the haibun, from the very first words, which would be egg yolk sunrise, which is just this kind of silly, kind of ridiculous, image. And then of course, egg yolks, eggs are in tortillas, or at least in some tortilla recipes. And so that all connects with the taco truck driver and the rest of the Haibun food truck loves. So
yeah, I just had this moment of course, taco truck. So tortillas, but then tortilla in a Spanish tortilla is basically a giant omelet. So I had this moment of like, of course there are, like, my brain forgot which tortilla we were talking about. And I'm like, of course there are eggs in tortillas. And then I'm like, wait, that's Spain. We're not talking about the bread tortilla.
Right. Yeah. So yeah. So this for this haiku or haibun, I was just really trying to kind of have a lot of fun, mainly to open the haibun, because it opens the haibun, which is kind of silly.
That is, I think that's great. I think I always love when the haiku, adds that it doesn't provide closure, but it provides some sort of consistency. That's that tonal consistency, I think, is always, that's something I value in my own reading, certainly. All right. So moving from there, I picked two that had some, to me, they had some more, shoot, I'm just going to go edit this part out again. That's the great thing. It's like, you can just edit it. Anyway, so moving from breakfast, do you want to read your next two?
Sure. Frost on green tomatoes, what she shouldn't know yet. Frost on green tomatoes, what she shouldn't know yet. Crescent moon, saving the crust for last. Crescent moon, saving the crust for last.
So in the first one, I loved that that tension between, first, just the tension of frost on green tomatoes. Like, either these tomatoes have bloomed very late, or something is really out of whack. And so that, to me, I loved this haiku, because that, to me, that something is out of whack in the garden really, that really magnified that sense of what she shouldn't know yet. It really just amped up that tension for me in a really profound way.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Do you garden?
I did a bit back in Austin. I actually have this whole horrible story about how I had to move and they ripped my gardens out after my landlord sold the house.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So my husband and I garden, and we are, as gardeners, we are definitely works in progress. But what we have experienced on any number of occasions is near the end of the season. There are still tomatoes on the vines that are a little green or even all green, and then the frost comes. Um, Potentially. Usually we obviously look out for that so that we can pull any green
Yeah.
tomatoes in. But sometimes we don't manage to do that. And so in a way, we have had that experience of having green tomatoes on the vine still with the frost, landing on them. Um, and the green tomatoes on the vine that late could just be because we just really don't know what we're doing. I mean, it could be as simple as that. But the image is sort of, the green tomato being this young tomato, as it were, and
Mhm.
and what she shouldn't know yet. So, I had in mind, this young girl, like maybe a tween or a teen who like many tweens and many teens these days, like are far more worldly wise for their age than I ever was at that age. And so, frost on the green tomatoes, the season is already moving on, but the tomatoes are still green and what she shouldn't know yet. So it seemed to kind of go into my
Yes.
head together.
Yeah. Oh, and now I'm thinking, of course, like frost wouldn't, because if my only experience is gardening in Austin, Texas, let me tell you, frost, not a thing we're really concerned about until winter is basically bearing down on
Got
us.
it. Okay, yeah. So for I don't know, I can't remember what our frost date, is here usually, but I want to say sometime October, early November, even some. Yeah, I mean, it could be even as early as September, I suppose. But yeah, it's probably a good 2-3 months. Then it sounds like earlier than
Yeah.
yours.
I looked up my region for my most recent blog post, and um, basically sometime between late October and December. But I'll say in all the years that I was had gardens there, like I didn't even need to start covering anything until about mid-December.
Uh-huh.
And none of my neighbors did. Like no one, it would be like, oh, it's about Christmas, better cover the plants.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a different
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
It is. And that's why I initially moved there.
Sure. Yeah.
Just one Cleveland winter,
Too
too
many.
many
Oh, yeah, I
for
hear you. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah. Um, yeah, and I think that a line of what she shouldn't know yet, that could you had your thoughts about a preteen girl, and to me it's, I don't know, it's like an 8-year, it could be an 8-year-old who figures out that their parents are getting divorced and they don't want them to know yet,
Yeah. Yeah.
or um, it's that 6-year-old who has figured out Santa isn't real and just like ruins it for all the other kids at
Yeah.
school.
Yeah, you're
Things
right.
like that,
Yeah.
like it could hit, and I think that's one of the things that haiku can, one image can be so universal for so many people because it can conjure up such specific things.
Definitely, definitely. That's and when that happens, that means that there's, you know, enough dreaming room in the poem, for that. So
Yeah. Oh, I love that, dreaming room. I should write that
I,
down.
I, I wish it were
That's a
mine. It's not my, I can't, I don't claim ownership to it, but that is, that way. I think haiku poets talk a lot about. I'll start that sentence again. I think haiku poets talk a lot about dreaming room, or think a lot about dreaming room. Um, it's
mhm.
it's definitely part of the kind of aesthetic, and I know it's part of it's part of my intention as a haiku poet, or as a poet who writes haiku, I should say. And
Mhm.
I know that there are other poets who really are very, very conscious of, is this juxtaposition working? If the juxtaposition of images is working, then it creates resonance, but there's also enough space. There's also, for dreaming room for those resonances, whatever they may be, to kind of come to mind. Um, and
Yeah,
those, of course, will be different
absolutely.
to other people.
Yes. Can you read Crescent Moon one more time? We've gotten in such a good discussion about frost that I've lost my train of
Yeah,
thought.
sure. Crescent moon, saving the crust for last.
Yes. um, Crescent Moon, and again, I've just responded on such a personal level to so many of these. But when I was a kid, I actually had a very specific way of eating pie, and I always had to have the crust at the very
Hmm.
end with like, and I had to reserve, if there was ice cream, I had to reserve just enough ice cream to to be on the crust. And it was like, it was a very particular thing. And I couldn't, I can't, looking back on it, I can't articulate why I did that other than, we would, especially with a particularly well baked pie crust, to me, there's something about, you get the sweet, but then you get the savory, and it was always just something that I really loved.
Hmm.
So, again, is this one that has a specific story, or is that something that sort of floated up to you as an image, just as an image unto itself?
I, I would say it has kind of a specific story. My husband and I, when when we were dating, I don't remember specifically where we were when we discovered this, but we were eating pizza. We were somewhere eating pizza, and probably for the first time together, you know,
Hmm.
and the pizza came, and we each helped each other or ourselves to a piece of pizza, and we got our forks and knives, and each of us started cutting off the crust, and then we started eating the crust, and we looked at each other and said, "Do you eat the crust first? Do you eat the crust first?" So actually, for us, we eat. My husband and I we still eat the pizza crust first, because
Oh wow.
it, I love a good pizza crust, just like you love a good
Hmm.
good pie crust, and who wouldn't, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But but once I have that hit of yeasty crust kind of by itself, then I want that, I want the toppings. Then the crust kind of becomes a platform for the, you know, the olive oil and the cheese and the tomatoes and whatever. Um, so that's sort of the kind of personal story, if you will, behind this particular haiku. And so I don't know how many people eat their crust first and how many people eat their crust last, whether it be pie crust or pizza crust. I don't have a sense for that.
Yeah.
But of course, the crescent moon kind of came in, obviously to mirror the shape
Yeah.
of whatever crust this is. Either it's a pizza or it's a pie or whatever. So
Yeah. I think it's super funny that my brain was just like, fruit pie. Clearly, that's what that's about.
and it can be, So
Yeah. Every time I have these discussions with anybody, this always happens. Like my brain just went somewhere, and it's I'm I always just go back to good old all that Stanley Fish and reader response
mhm.
criticism I had to read back in grad school, that I've never really used again. But I just think about it every time I talk to somebody about their haiku.
Sure, that's interesting. One thing I will say about your comment, though, early on in this part of our conversation about the pie crust is that there is nothing better than a really good, you know, shortening based, pie
Oh
crust.
yeah.
And
Hmm.
it's such an art, I mean, it's simple ingredients, but you can really you can work it too much, or I don't know what it is, or and certainly you can bake it too long or at the wrong temperature, and
Yeah.
and it won't turn out, but sometimes it will. At least that's my experience, but I'm maybe that's just where I am as a baker.
And for me, it was all about getting over the fear of lard. I don't know why I had a fear of lard. I think because I was a kid in the 90s when everyone was like, eat margarine and rice cakes and don't eat fat. So I was like, lard, oh my God, lard will kill me.
Right.
No, lard makes pie crust
Oh yeah.
delicious.
Yeah, there's no doubt, no doubt.
Yeah. And I'm like, certainly lard can't be worse for you than margarine.
It goes back and forth, doesn't it? I mean, one year
It
it's all
does.
about the lard, the next year it's all about the margarine, then it's all about the no, we've all got to eat butter. I mean, yes.
And eggs are the best thing you could eat, or eggs will kill you.
Yeah,
Who's to say, really?
right. Exactly. Yeah.
But lard for me, lard and pie crust is just where it's at. So. And so then I put two Monaco together, that I really loved, and I thought they went really well as a pair.
Okay. Winter darkness, the depth of a wine glass. Winter darkness, the depth of a wine glass. Autumn planting children in the past tense. Autumn planting children in the past tense.
And so I put these two together because they really, I'm like, oh, geez, I shouldn't have ended on such a dark note. But we can talk about happier things in the final thought. Um, but there is some like really intense emotional resonance in both of these. Certainly, like the winter darkness and picturing someone who's maybe alone, and we were talking about earlier sort of the jovial social side of drinking, but like also it can not be okay. And this Monaco for me really speaks to it's dark and it's cold and maybe someone's alone, and just how like both literally and metaphorically deep that glass can really get.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely that meaning in there. And I was aware of that when I was writing it, though I did not write it from that place, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I wrote, I was interested in this idea of this, in this idea of a wine glass, which in the grand scheme of things is not that deep, you
No.
know. Um, and just what kind of goes with that idea, what fits with a wine glass being something deep, not just in a sort of physical sense, but more in sort of a metaphorical sense. And so winter darkness kind of just popped into my head.
Mhm.
And when I write one line haiku, and I'm not alone in this, I'm sure, but when I write one line haiku, I'm really looking, that tends to be where I work most intuitively, um, and most in a sort of right brain sense. So like I couldn't tell you from where I was coming from, which was not a point of kind of depression and solitude when I wrote
Yeah.
this poem. I couldn't tell you really what winter darkness and the depth of a wine glass actually have to do with each other, but they just kind of feel like they belong together.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. But again, there
Mhm.
definitely is the reading that you just gave
Yeah.
it in the poem.
And as we're discussing, I'm like, oh, it doesn't even have to be dark. It could, it can relate to like just accidentally getting it over your head. Like I can remember being like 21 and like I don't have any clue that like you're not supposed to just fill the whole glass
Well,
up.
that's a good point too, right. Yeah.
Like you don't know, like you're 21 and you're so excited like to like I can finally drink wine, and it's like no, that's not what a pour is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And sometimes, you see these like big at restaurants, big wine glasses with
Oh
just like maybe like 2 inches of wine, and that's okay.
yeah.
I mean, that's really
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then autumn planning. That one definitely, as you're talking about being in that more sort of associative state writing Monaco, that really comes out for
Mm,
me
mhm.
um, with autumn planning. And certainly like it's one where, and I really have no, honestly, much. I don't have any of my own children. I have very little experience around. Like I was the one of the youngest kids in my family. I was just about the end of all of us. So, so I couldn't tell you like like I actually can't project any sort of meaning onto this haiku
Mm, mhm.
um, at all. But and yet, like the idea of children in the past tense and like it really resonates with me even though I can't put a meaning on it.
Mhm.
And I think that's when someone is writing from that associative space and really hits on an association, it doesn't matter whether it has a if you can like impose a meaning on it or an association on it or not. It resonates on some deeper level that you can't you can't explain.
Right, that's the intuitive level as opposed to the sort of
Yeah.
rational kind of left brain, kind of level. Um, so in this poem, yes, this is definitely an intuitive poem for me. And, from left to right, just reading across the one line of the poem, there's autumn planting, so which is a
Mhm.
gardening term, right? There's spring plantings, there's autumn plantings, there's, maybe even winter plantings. I don't know. Um, just as a kind of aside here, one of the things I love to grow is garlic, and you plant garlic in the autumn. You plant it, like up
Mm.
here in Ohio, we plant it in like late October, early November. So that's definitely an autumn planting. And then and then and then there's also this idea, and then there's children in the past tense, sort of in the second half of
Mhm.
of the poem. So the cut, really is after planting and before children. So autumn planting, children in the past tense. The curate is right there between planting and children. But since this isn't a one line format, you also have, in addition to autumn planting, you also have this idea of planting children embedded in the
Yeah.
poem, which is a little
Mhm.
bit of, what's understood as misreading as meaning. So autumn planting
Yeah.
children in the past means, but autumn planting children. You'd never plant
Yeah.
children, but there is that you can misread the poem for that
Yeah.
specific meaning right in the middle of the poem. And then children in the past tense is also another sort of intuitive, or maybe counterintuitive, depending on how you want to look
Yeah.
at it, sort of collocation, that kind of speaks to this idea of seasonality, particularly within a woman's experience. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a springtime for female fertility, and there's an autumn for female fertility, and so on, and a winter for female
Yeah.
fertility. So there is that resonance as well, that kind of layer in the, that layer of meaning in the poem as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though there's planting, and so there's that sense of preparing for the future and that sense of that hope, like to me autumn almost always, especially if you're putting autumn and something related to a past tense or a past anything, I'm like again, my heart goes just right to a sense of melancholy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that was definitely part of the intention with this poem. I can definitely say
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
No. Yeah. Again, I loved hearing about your sort of intuitive approach to those, and it really comes through. So we are at the point of wrapping up, and I know you had a piece called Bechamel that we thought would be fun to discuss, and it didn't come up organically in our conversation. So do you want to talk about that piece?
Sure, I can talk about that piece. And actually, I'm going to take a little bit of an aside here that you can edit out. So to ask you a quick question, you asked for a recipe. This bechamel is
Mhm.
actually this haibun bechamel is actually kind of a recipe.
Oh,
Do you
cool.
want me to read it, or maybe not? I don't know. I don't know how much time.
Oh, go
Okay,
ahead.
okay.
I mean, go ahead. Like again, I can just edit
You can
it.
edit it
So
out if you don't want it in there. So, but
yeah,
sure, I'll
yeah,
talk about bechamel. I'll just read it really quickly. Um, and probably everyone listening to this podcast, given the name of the podcast, Culinary Saijiki, and the theme, the subject of the podcast, which is food and haiku and seasonality, already knows what bechamel is. But it's basically a French, like, butter and flour based cream sauce. But it has all sorts of different uses. I think it's one of the mother sauces, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah. It's one of the big four mother
yeah.
sauces.
Bechamel. He tilt-a-whirls melting pats of butter all around the frying pan. You have to make a roux first, then holds the pan still at an angle. Drop a spoonful of flour in there. And I mound the spoon high with flour and plop it in the pool of butter, and my father stirs up a slush that looks like the paste we used in art class to make papier-mâché pencil holders. Now add in a few drops of milk. So I angle the glass of milk over the pan, and he stirs some more. A little more milk there. And he stirs some more Then he says, now drop. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
So I angle the glass of milk over the pan, and he stirs some more. A little more milk there. And he stirs some more. Then he says, now drop those little pieces of chipped beef in there. and he spoons chipped beef gravy onto squares of toast. The white sauce has to be not too thick, but not too thin either, he says. It's the glue that binds. Winter morning, sun glints off his plate and mine. So that's bechamel. It's, there's a recipe for a roux in there, embedded in there, and those instructions, those recipe instructions, are actually in the voice of my father. In the text, they actually appear in italics. So there's kind of a visual cue that a different speaker is speaking. And what inspired this haibun was actually one day when I was growing up. I mean, I was maybe probably like 10 years old or something like that. And I was old enough to kind of be around the stove, and my dad and I were in the kitchen. He was making, chipped beef gravy and toast for us for breakfast, and was just kind of teaching me as he did that, sort of how to make a roux. And that has always stuck with me,
Yeah.
But I didn't realize until much later that that's the basis for this really important mother sauce. And so in a way, so I played initially with this idea of calling that piece like mother sauce, because I had to do with my dad, but I couldn't make that work.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that haibun comes straight out of my family experience, and it also is one of the haibun in Joyride.
And it's the recipes in there, but it's very reminiscent of like the recipes in like I hope I'm getting the right book, like Larousse Gastronomique, which like it gives you the instructions like that, but it's not something that's going to measure out every single little like thing precisely.
Sure.
Yeah. It's one of those that sort of assumes you already seems to assume you already have some knowledge of how to measure things, or you'll figure it out as you go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Right. And for making a roux and making kind of a basic cream sauce, yeah, you don't need, a lot of very detailed measurements. But some of the there are so many recipes like that, and some of the best kind of comfort food recipes, if I can call them that, are precisely that.
Mm-hmm.
My husband and I had a really interesting, my husband and I had a really fun experience along those lines when we were in Italy. We were staying at the home of a couple my husband knew from research trips to Italy, and the woman of the couple was making dinner, and we were all just kind of standing around the kitchen and maybe sipping a glass of wine or something, and she was battering zucchini blossoms and frying zucchini blossoms, which to die for.
Yeah.
And my husband asked her, can we have, because we love fried zucchini blossoms. My husband asked her, in Italian, can you give us the recipe? Because we figured this has to be an authentic Italian, zucchini batter recipe. And she looked at us and said, "Recipe? What recipe? It's a." She said, "È una pasta." It's just a paste. It's just a. And so we thought, okay, all right, okay. But oh my gosh, those fried zucchini blossoms were memorable. I mean, I'm sure you've had like memorable meals, or like a memorable dish that someplace that you just kind of has stayed with you.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, the first affogato I ever had. I had an opportunity to go to Vienna for a project I did, and my friend and I, we had a lot of great meals there. We were in Prague for a little bit, and then Vienna, but we went to the cafe that Freud and just many other great thinkers had gone to, and I did not know what an affogato was, and I could not my sort of my German of any kind was poor, so I was not entirely clear what I was ordering. I spent a lot of the time in Vienna just ordering things and being very surprised when I got it, always pleasantly. But so I got an affogato for the first time, which is an Italian coffee, but of course I just had it in a Viennese cafe, and it. For those of you who don't know, affogato is a shot of espresso that, depending where you are, is with gelato or ice cream or whipped cream. This had fresh whipped cream that had been whipped by hand, and I just about just died of happiness. That was the most perfect coffee I have ever had in my whole life.
Yeah. That's pretty hard to beat. Yeah. I also had an experience. This is going to sound really, really weird, but when I was in Germany one time in Nuremberg, I ate lunch at the Ratskeller, and ordered really what is very much a standard kind of German meal. It was, sausages and red cabbage sauerkraut and, potatoes. I mean, it's very, very, very kind of common and traditional German meal. But that red sauerkraut melted in my mouth. I mean, it was just like, and so, coming back to the United States, I haven't been able to find that kind of incredible red sauerkraut here. I found some very, very good red sauerkraut, some very, very good, but not Nuremberg Ratskeller good. And isn't that a weird thing to remember, like, the sauerkraut?
If you come to St. Louis, I'll see if John can replicate it, because my partner John has a knack for being able to replicate even things he's never tasted. Like during the first couple months of the pandemic, it was my birthday, nothing was happening, and he managed to replicate my favorite version of chili relleno from my favorite restaurant in Mexico City, despite never having eaten it.
Now that's a keeper. Right?
Yeah,
but that's pretty incredible.
He might be able to get your sauerkraut right for you.
Well, if he does, then he should market it, because it was, quite unreal. I must say.
All right. Any final thoughts about food and haiku, or just haiku practice in general?
Well, I guess my final thought, actually, I will give you my final thought. You're going to have to edit that out too, but the rain is coming through my window, so let me just close the window.
Okay.
I'm so sorry, Allison. This is going to be a little bit of a big edit job for you.
It's not going to be as bad as the one where we had to record in a cafe and everything went wrong. So,
I listened to that one though, and I actually, particularly for a food, podcast, I liked the sort of clinking dishes and stuff like that. I thought it worked well.
It was beyond my skill set, and I had to just send it out and pay someone to do it.
Okay, got it. Yeah, okay.
And you know what? If it's something I would like to do again, but again, at the moment, I just don't have the setup to make that work.
Sure.
But that is something I would totally love. That's something I would love to do in the future when I get a little more skill.
Sure. Yeah, my last thought about food would be, as I mentioned a little earlier, one of my favorite things to grow is garlic, and you plant it in the fall, it winters over, you do nothing to it, except watch for the garlic, the green shoots to kind of peek up through the snow, like in, I don't know, maybe February, early March or something like that. And it's such a hopeful thing. I always watch for that. And then you eventually harvest the garlic around the 4th of July. Up, at least, that's kind of the schedule up here in Ohio. And I love the metaphor of planting garlic, this plant that you bury this plant down in the earth, and it thrives and grows over the course of the dead of winter. I love that. I have not been able to write a successful garlic haiku or other poem to save my life. It's really bumming me out. And so that's what I have to say about food, and also kind of about haiku, maybe at the same time, all in one go. But beyond that, I think that certainly food, with its connection to the earth and with its connections to the seasons, is such a great subject for haiku. I would love to see more food haiku, and maybe through your podcast, I'll have a chance at least to hear some more. So that's awesome.
Yeah. I'm trying to get more of it into the world, and I'm really enjoying the process.
I can tell, and the podcast is great. So
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking part of your Saturday to talk to me. This has been lovely.
oh, this really has been so fun, Allison. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks again to Jennifer Hambrick for being part of this project. It really meant a lot to me that you were willing to come on the show. If you would like to be on the podcast, just go to culinarysaijiki.com, click the Join the Conversation button, and that page will get you started. And if for some reason that page is not working, reach out to me on social media or via email, and we'll figure it out. Tech stuff happens all the time. Also, I'm, planning the last 3 months of content for the blog, and I always have ideas for things I want to talk about. But if there is a food and haiku related topic that you are interested in reading more about and you'd like me to explore, feel free to reach out, and I will think about adding it to my list. Or honestly, if I'm super excited about it, I might just jump it to the front of the line. You can also support the project at buymeacoffee.com/culinarysaijiki. And, if nothing else, again, share this with anyone you think would be interested. I am noticing it is super echoey in here right now. This is a 130-ish year old house with some 12-foot ceilings, and the walls are all completely bare right now. So I'm just going to call it good for this week and hope that by the next time I record something, it will, I'll have unpacked enough that it won't be quite so echoey. I'll have all of my books and my records out and my posters hung up, and that'll provide a good effect. Anyway, so I hope that's a little better next time. And thank you for listening. Enjoy your week.